Legend has it that an eagle brought down the essential components of a tree that grew on an unnamed Persian mountain. The story of the gods reviving beverage is old and nearly universal. The story of Zeus's eagle carrying the nectar and the mead away by the eagle metamorphosis of Odin, supports Keith's theory that the conception originated earlier when an eagle from its guardian demon brought down the nectar in the form of honey mead from heaven. This, or a comparable nectar, was used to begin ceremonies at On in Egypt, and the Persian notable Gushtasp, who was ruled by Zoroastrian priestly hierophants, supports the idea that this is not the whole story. In these latter instances, the intention was to help the soul leave the body and give the initiate the sensation of passing through the heavens. According to Berriedale Keith, the Rig Veda's deification of earthly rivers raises an interesting point. The terrestrial waters aren't given as much attention in the Rig Veda as the celestial ones. The Singhu, or Indus, and its tributaries are honored in one hymn, X75, and the Vipas, Bis, and Sutudri, or Sutlej, are praised in another. But people frequently exalt Sarasvati exaggeratedly, portraying her as the sevenfold greatest mother and goddess, walking on the mountaintops with her waves. Some even attribute her celestial origin, hinting at the later myth of the Ganges' heavenly birth. There is uncertainty regarding the Sarasvati's exact identity. The Haravati of the Avesta, commonly known as the River Helmand in Afghanistan, shares the same name. The presence of Indian settlements much further west than is generally assumed during the Vedic era is implied if the Rigveda continues to refer to the Sarasvati as that river. However, Sarasvati's description of a vast river with 7 streams is more in line with the massive Indus stream, indicating that the word might have been used as a secondary name for that river. It is clear that the Drishadvati, a small stream in the middle country, is an earlier form of the present river of the same name that is now buried beneath the sands. A much more important stream once poured into the Indus. The land around these 2 rivers was the site of the full development of Vedic culture, at least in the later era, and the Rigveda probably gave the stream most of its later significance at an early age. Our general understanding of the hierarchies of the Anunnaki, the Shining Ones, fits nicely with Vedic mythology's ability to group gods according to shared interests, professions, or duties. We have already discussed the Murats, who appear to be in line with their third order of craftsmen, and the group of 7 or 8 Adityas, who appear to have many characteristics in common with the senior order of the Anunnaki. The Vasus are another Indian group whose numbers, and to some degree their character, are unknown. Later, they were thought to be latent principles in everything, which may have something to do with Chinese Taoism, but they are also linked to wealth and material plenty. Given that their name clearly denotes the bright, or shining ones, one could compare them to the Karsag lords of cultivation in this latter association. The Vedic hymns describe how the gods created humans, as in other mythologies we've covered. T. Vashkri was an artist who gained notoriety for roughing the cup that held the god's ambrosia. As the world's fashioner, he molded the forms, adapted and put together the pieces, and gave the world that diversity of parts. He was also regarded as the divine power of construction. He made a husband and wife for each other in the womb. Maybe we should go elsewhere to read about what Enki and Belet Ili did. The only goddess mentioned in the celestial group, or first order of gods, is Ushas, but we must consider an interesting addition. According to Ryan Moorhen, the collective name Adityas was given to a group of shining gods who were unquestionably the sons of Aditi. Aditi is frequently referred to in the Rig Veda as a single goddess with no distinguishable physical attributes. According to the Rig Veda, she was luminous and bright, the mistress of a bright stall, a creature's advocate, and a component of all people. Mitra, Varuna, Ahriman, and 8 sons were all born to her. She was their sister, according to the Odysseus. This is not unusual. She might be Aditya, sister. and their leader, Mother. This leads to the fascinating question of whether the supreme commander of the Anunnaki in Eden was not a woman, like Gabrielle, possibly referred to as Aditi by the early Indians, the Most High by the Hebrews, and Anu by the Sumerians. The gender of Anu and the Most High is still unknown despite our growing understanding. In its Aditi form, the goddess's name, Adichi, is Emeku in conception. Both father, Semitic form Abu, and mother, Semitic form Ummu, were represented by the Ad's initial pictogram. The original gender of this term cannot be ascertained. There are conflicting feelings even when analyzing the old symbol for Enu. Barton labels the Sumerian transcription in uppercase, the Semitic and Akkadian transcription in lowercase, and the English translation in italics in the following list. The gender issue was only resolved in the later Semitic Akkadian language, and recollections of the distant past were dim by chat time, say 2000 BC. It seems the ancients were unsure about the sex of their main gods. The Aditya's leader was unquestionably a woman, according to the early Indians of the Rig Veda period. The mythological interpretation of the ancient Rig Veda changed with the writing of the Brahmanas and the explanatory prose texts of the early first millennium BC. Berriedale Keith said of these changes, "The most essential characteristic of them all is the absence of Rigveda polytheism. Rigveda polytheism is no longer real, according to mythology. It is indisputable that the many pantheon gods, to which others are added, exist. Nevertheless, the writings exhibit clear inclinations to produce gods with more imposing and all-encompassing power than any Vedic deity. Prajapati, Vishnu, and Rudra are the three pantheon figures who exhibited the outcomes of this undertaking. As predicted, this study demonstrates how pantheons evolve over time. The personalities of one millennium were likely to be different from those of another, and the Anunnaki came and went. This was emphasized in Volume 1, where Yahweh of the third and second millennia and Ugmash of the eighth millennium evolved into Shamash of the third, presumably with others in between. Even gods needed home leave from a foreign land and might have been posted elsewhere while performing their duties, so the group of Adityas would have changed by the time the Brahmanas were written. However, Prajapati seems to be reimagining an old god rather than being a new god. He has been compared to the all-creator of the Rigveda, Visvakarman, and sometimes to the Samhita's father and son, Aditi, Daksa. The creation story is now told in various ways, each with universally applicable constants. The ocean's waters pushed the most popular version to the top of the hierarchy of existence. Through tapas, which appears to have its roots in the verb tap, which means heat, the waters created a golden egg. Prajapati was born from this egg and became one of the many gods who were said to have come in this way. Keith says, "The story. The story is important because it demonstrates universal aspects of Indian religion. The creation story changes over time by philosophical conjecture that resolves the waters into a primordial substance, prakrti. However, the common representation of the golden egg has not changed despite spiritualization. The god's creation is replaced by the idea of Purusa, or spirit, one of Prajapati's names, which enters the material Prakriti. He compares his creative power to giving birth. It foreshadows the androgynous nature of the god, which is formally represented in literature and art as the half-woman, half-man figure of Shiva. The philosophy that permeates Hinduism was inspired by this reworking of Vedic mythologies. The New Larousse defines Hindu as the group that resulted from the mixing or closeness of different Indian races. Hinduism, on the other hand, is the social, religious, and mythological conflation that results from interpreting the widest range of rituals, beliefs, and superstitions. It goes on to say that because the Brahmins were still the most educated caste and were meant to preserve the Vedic tradition, this syncretism took place under the cover of Brahmanism. In Hindu history, The Orthodox Church had to bless what it could not tolerate to survive by compromising on new or foreign doctrines and customs. According to the Brahmana's revised interpretation, Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer, were the new trio of potent gods. The restored god, gentle and cooperative, is portrayed sitting on white lotus flowers with his wife, the brilliant and perfumed Lakshmi, at his right. This is the little personified Vishnu of the Vedic age, Vich, the principle of light penetrating the entire universe. Vishnu represents the cycle of creation that repeats itself throughout all ages and individual reincarnation. Larousse uses the avatars of Vishnu to describe this idea. Vishnu rests on the snake Sesha, whose 7 heads form a canopy for him, while he sleeps on the cosmic waters during the pauses between successive creations. This sleep is a state in which the virtuality of the god gradually ripens and re-emerges in a different universe. It is not death. India views these cycles of rest and activity, which span thousands of millions of centuries, as the inhalation and exhalation of the god. An avatar, or manifestation of the god Vishnu, is associated with each cycle of creation. Theoretically, there are 10 of these avatars, but the abundance of the public's imagination has grown significantly. Vamana is the Bali Dwa, and the lion avatar appears in Hiranyakasipu's tale. The idea that Vishnu's 10 avatars are 10 successive Anunnaki seniors, assuming the position that Vishnu once occupied, is not out of the question. According to Keith, the 2 great epics of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, in their complex and developed form, offer a conception that was completely, or at least primarily, missing during the Vedic era. Hesiod's 4 ages are compared and contrasted with this theory of the world's ages. The 4 ages were considered innocent and were thought to be included all the time in the Greek version. The Indian version, on the other hand, sees the ages as simply the embodiment of the absolute, followed by a period of reabsorption before the ages reappear. The following table lists these ages and their corresponding periods, set against Anunnaka's arrival at Karsag around 8000 BC. According to the epic, the first age, known as Krita, began slowly, with a dawn of 400 years, and ended with a twilight period of the same duration in this evolution of man's association with the gods. According to the epic, this was the golden age of the world, when everything was in harmony, and there were no human ills like illness, arrogance, or mental weakness. Nonetheless, the epic explained the formation of 4 castes, the priest, the warrior, the husbandman, and the serf, to emphasize the meaning of the remark above. This distinction is altered, though, by the assertion that they worshipped a single god, complied with a single Veda, and followed a single law. In this period, people sought fulfillment through absorption into the absolute, rather than the outcomes of their actions. We must only apply the principles of this proposed record of the distant past to the dawn period if we are to find any rationality in it. After that, we must declare that the Anunnaki's noble plans tragically failed. It is clear from Table 1 at the start of this book, Chronology of the Activities of the Shining Ones, that the Anunnaki decided they could no longer handle the work needed in the middle of the 8th millennium BC, and sent reinforcements. A dream for the Shining Ones ended when the apostate Watchers arrived around 7600 BC, at the end of the dawn period of the Krita Age. The world of the Jordan Valley fell into anarchy, eventually subdued by the flood. However, it's possible that the world experienced 4 centuries of golden prosperity under the benevolent teachings of the Karsag founders, beginning around 8000 BC when the Anunnaki arrived. We would have seen the rise of warlike dynasties in Egypt's Nile Valley with their ensuing materialism, the establishment of dynastic rule in the Mesopotamian city-states, and the growth of religious rituals, temples, and priestly classes by the end of the Krita Age. Compared to its complete perfection during the Golden Age, Treta's virtue is said to have decreased by a quarter during the Second Age. When sacrifices and sacrificial rites were introduced, people tried to achieve spiritual salvation by doing good deeds, like giving and offering, rather than meditating and giving up the world. Asceticism was still widely practiced, and duties were still strictly performed. The fact that the Sikh saints, under the leadership of Guru Nanak in the 16th century AD, returned to the idea of salvation through renunciation and meditation 5,000 years later, and continue to do so in a community that now spans the entire world, is perhaps remarkable. The bloodthirsty despotism of Yahweh, which resulted in the subjugation and genocide of the Jordan Valley peoples, the fall of Jerusalem, and the exile of the Jewish people to Babylon, as well as the beginnings of the glorious Sumerian civilization, all contributed to a continuous decline in virtues in the Middle East during the Treta Age, if the timescale is accurate. According to the epic, after losing 1 foot in each of the previous ages, the bull of justice stood on 2 feet in the Third Age, the Dvapara, which started around 1000 BC. In India, the number of Vedas increased to 4, but many men were still ignorant or only knew 1, 2, or 3. As the number of treaties about duties increased, so did the number and complexity of ceremonies. But as sin and illness increased, people began to ascetic and sacrifice for gain rather than out of a lack of interest. As a result of the necessity for marital laws during this time, both dawn and twilight were shortened to 200 years, and humanity's age was lowered to 2,000 years. We live in the modern age. The Kali, the worst of the 4 ages, was brought about by a dawn that lasted only a century. During this time, virtue had endured. A solid foundation persisted despite the near extinction of religion, the disdain for the Vedas, the general unrest, and the beginning of caste confusion. And who can argue that this, written about 2,500 years ago, is not a fair assessment of these contemporary times? According to the epic, the Kali age will last 1,000 years, and our calendar will conclude at the end of the 20th century. According to the Mahabharata epic, the short twilight of a century will preclude everyone's absorption into the absolute spirit. Vishnu will manifest as 7 suns in the sky, devour anything that does not burn in a great fire, and finish the devastation with a flood. Furthermore, the epic states that a new Krita age cannot begin to dawn before 10 million years have passed, which is equivalent to the 1,000-fold repetition of the entire ages. This total reabsorption, or dissolution, and rebirth over the ages occurs in the gods and humans. According to Keith, this doctrine of the ages is merely a forceful declaration of the fundamental tenet of the epic's mythology, that the gods themselves are no longer autonomous, eternal beings, that despite their glory and honor, they are still subject to a higher power, just like humans. This claim will only gain strength as the study progresses. Keith continues by stating that the gods are primarily noticeable in the epic due to their inability to meddle in human affairs. In contrast to Homer's gods, the gods, aside from Vishnu, can only cheer the fighters, not help or support them. However, at the start of the Anunnaki visitation, Homer's gods were, as we have explained, the old gods of the Golden Age. According to the Larousse comment on the avatars of Vishnu, the god Vishnu's cycles of activity and rest lasted for thousands of millions of centuries, which seems odd given the ages we just covered, and the 10 million years the epic says must elapse before a new world can bloom once more. But we shouldn't make fun of these times. 2 dissolutions are described in Indian saintly philosophies: minor and grand dissolution, which happen at significantly larger intervals than the former. 10 million years might be a fair amount of time for intelligent life to re-establish itself on Earth, if we were to say that succeeding generations would extinguish themselves in a nuclear holocaust akin to the one described in the Mahabharata. The duration of at least 100 billion years is suggested by the fact that modern astronomers can understand thousands of millions of years. Cosmologists now try to differentiate between two competing theories of the physical universe. The universe should expand to infinity in infinite time if its total mass is below the critical figure, allowing gravitational forces to stop the expansion that has occurred since its creation. Alternatively, the universe's mass may be sufficiently large to eventually stop the expansion, after which it should contract under the force of gravity until it is so dense and small that it explodes again. The cycle of universes would have a logical explanation if the latter were true. Assume that, as many astronomers think, the universe is 20 billion years old. In that scenario, it might keep growing for another 30 billion years before contracting for 50 billion years. At this point, another Big Bang might occur. A cycle of universes renewing themselves every 100 billion years is not unthinkable in such a scenario. Once more, a comment made by Jesus of Nazareth and preserved in the Askew Codex must be considered relative time in context. Mary Magdalene asked Jesus, "My Lord, how many years of the world is a year of the light?" as he was almost done speaking to his disciples. Jesus replied, "A day in the light is 1,000 years in the world, so that 365,000 years in the world are 1 year in the light." In the material-spiritual regions, 274,000 Earth years would be equivalent to a universal cycle under this format. As physicists add mass to the ubiquitous neutrino and astronomers find more dark matter in and between galaxies, the cyclical theory of gravitational mass now seems more plausible. There is a lot of mystery and confusion surrounding the triad, which consists of the three major Indian gods, Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. They essentially share a relationship with the Christian Trinity, in that they are often distinct facets of the same deity. Only in the epic is the doctrine of a triad established in a section of the Mahabharata where it is written, "Prajapati creates in the form of Brahma, preserves in his human form as Vishnu, and destroys in his form as Rudra Shiva." Furthermore, according to Keith, the creator god is only considered to be one of the manifestations of the two major sectarian deities, Shiva and Vishnu, and this is alien to the epic as a whole and the Ramayana. However, these distinctions are more about emphasis than content. According to the Mahabharata, Shiva, the ten-armed, resides on Mount Mandara, but he also resides on the holy Himavant, on the north side of Mount Meru, in a beautiful wood that is always blooming and teeming with divine beings. When he was tempted by Tilottama, a lovely nymph made by Brahma from everything that was most valuable in his world, he developed 4 faces and flashed his hair like the sun. While the sun, moon, and fire are said to be Shiva's 3 eyes elsewhere, Shiva is shown with 3 eyes that shine like 3 suns. His 3rd eye appeared after his wife, Uma, performed a playful act. She once put her hands over his eyes in jest. A 3rd eye then blazed forth on the god's forehead to save the world after it was abruptly plunged into darkness, causing men to shudder in terror and all life to appear in danger of going extinct. Today, this 3rd eye is used in mystical symbolism to symbolize the seat of the soul and the beginning of the path, which allows meditators to ascend to the higher regions. Shiva has innumerable names and a plethora of shapes, all representing his character's good or bad side. Dharma, meaning justice, water, and the moon, are mild, while fire, lightning, and the sun are terrible forms. The name Mahesvara, meaning the Great Lord, comes from his sovereign power. The name Mahesdeva, meaning the Great God, comes from his greatness and omnipotence, and the name Rudra comes from his fierceness, which causes him to eat flesh, blood, and marrow. On the other hand, he is given the names Shiva, the auspicious, and Sankara, the healer, because of his wish to bestow blessings on everyone. He is Hara, the sweeper away of all beings, the destructive force that ultimately wipes out the universe. In addition, he destroys both the good and the bad by sending illness and death. He rules the entire world as Kala, Ka, or Kai, time. Death. He visits everyone without bias. He is the ultimate destroyer of the phenomenal universe and its creator in the form of Kala or Kai. Everything occurs at his instigation, and he gives everything life. He is known to readers as Kai Niranjan, the chief negative power of the lower spiritual regions. Since it expands our understanding of the semi-spiritual deities who have authority over the material world, one of the Shiva-related incidents is especially significant to this research. Kama, who is referred to as the deity of love, approached Kala while he was in a deep state of meditation and convinced him to have a son with his wife Parvati, Uma, that would be strong enough to overthrow the Daitya Taraka, who had taken over the worlds. Shiva was so furious that he was said to have burned Kama to ashes with a single glance of his eye. This is how the god of love is known as Ananga, or bodiless. The Mahabharata mentions the incident in passing. Nevertheless, Kalidasa's treatment of it in the epic Kumara Sambhava, which describes how the unfortunate Kama sparked Shiva's love and the subsequent creation of the new war god, gave it its notoriety. Shiva's destruction of the 3 Asuran citadels during the battles these demons fought against the gods stands out among his many other martial feats. Since even the powerful Indra could not breach these citadels, the gods turned to Shiva in the guise of Rudra, who destroyed the forts and drove out the Danavas. We are particularly drawn to a comparison of Shiva's nature with that of Yahweh, the Hebrew war god, because of the contrast between his wrath, cruelty, and warlike bloodthirstiness on the one hand, and his gentle, loving, and giving asceticism on the other. In a fit of rage, he also set fire to others, including Aaron's 2 sons, Nadab and Abihu, see chapter 9. However, based on like father, like son, we must remember that Kai Niranjan has 3 triple Powo red lieutenants, one of whom, we think the Authades, most likely took on the form of Yahweh Elohim. The demon Asuras is another example of duality, though it has different meanings. These demons were fierce combatants. In addition to being innumerable, they were adept at all forms of magic, changing into any shape, and using their terrible roars to instill fear. They were once morally upright, virtuous, and renowned for their austerity. However, as their numbers increased, they turned arrogant and evil. They stopped offering sacrifices and going to the sacred sites and rebelled against the gods. The Watchers and their offspring in Hebrew patriarchal households are reminiscent of this duality. The Nagas, referred to as serpents, are given a lot of importance in the epic. They had many places to call home, including Nagaloka, also known as Snake World, in the depths of the earth, filled with palaces, towers, and pleasure gardens. The Serpent King Vasuki resided in Bhogavati, their principal town. However, caves, inaccessible mountains, valleys, Kurukshetra, the banks of the Ikshumati River, the Naimisha Forest, the Gomati shores, the northern banks of the Ganges, and the Nishada district were also where they were discovered. Despite their size, they were described as attractive, multi-shaped, and able to wear earrings. It is said that the little snakes were for Karna, and the great serpents were for Arjuna in the epic battle between the gods and the demons. Given that Arjuna was a friend of the gods, especially Krishna, an avatar of Vishnu, and that the great serpents, the highest order of the gods, would have helped their own, this was inevitable. The junior order of artisans involved in a conflict likely comparable to that at Karsag was the Little Serpents. But the next chapter will tell us more about this struggle. The extraordinary traditions of the European populations have not yet revealed the compelling evidence for the existence of the Shining Ones and their origins. To preserve a certain degree of geographical coherence, we will proceed with 2 brief chapters on China and Japan, before going back to the main focus of this inquiry. This brief and hazy overview of Indian mythology has, in our opinion, been somewhat disappointing and unfulfilling, because, although it is strong on characters and descriptions, It overemphasizes these aspects at the expense of our comprehension of the goals and purposes of the gods' visit to the subcontinent. However, it does make three compelling arguments. B. The tripartite nature of the gods' hierarchy. C. The ambivalent, almost schizophrenia-like nature of some of the personalities. And D. The radiant nature of the main characters, which firmly places them in the school of the Shining One. As said, Hindus have produced some remarkable works in philosophy. The ultimate goal of all Indian philosophical research is to demonstrate how, by fully immersing ourselves in the dairy, we can ultimately overcome the curse of transmigration and achieve eternal happiness. A superior man who sees both things and the Tao of things is uncommon in China, the land of the three emperors. Although the Tao of the universe is beyond wisdom and kindness, it is kindness and wisdom. According to I Ching, there is ongoing debate regarding the origins of the Che tribes, which initially appeared in the Yellow River Valley before spreading into the Chinese race. However, since China's major rivers typically flow east, assuming that the mainland has drifted from west to east makes sense. The early Chinese annalists made no effort to attribute their country's origin to a supernatural or divine source. The story of the birth of the fabled founder of the Chow dynasty is the closest thing to what John C. Ferguson refers to as such extravagance. Qiang Yuan's son was Hu Qi, to whom the Chow household offered sacrifices. It was said that his mother, who had been childless for a while, became pregnant, Sais, after stepping on a god-made footprint, and gave birth to Hu Qi. Unbeknownst to us, sheep and oxen helped raise this amazing son, providing him with loving care and protection. He was shielded by birds and held up by their wings. He could support himself early on by growing wheat and beans, which he distributed to his self-sufficient people. For their livelihood, Hao Chi Pai is the lovely millet grains reaped in abundance and piled up on the ground. In Karsag Epic Numbrel C Chapter 3, they are called the small grain, the mountain grain. People have acknowledged this story as a fable throughout history and have viewed it with mild tolerance but without belief. It would be foolish to ignore it without carefully examining its symbolic significance. The idea of a miraculous birth is present in most early traditions, and our ally, the Anunnaki, is also somewhat involved. However, the common pattern we have frequently seen elsewhere is established when the local population associates the idea of a miraculous birth with introducing a grain crop for sustenance. However, a person's miraculous birth does not equate to a divine origin for the race. Ferguson remarks that the keen common sense of the Chinese race, which has been one of their most prominent characteristics in all ages, has kept Kem from the folly of ascribing a divine origin to their particular race. Beginning with Huang Ti, the first of the five sovereigns, who ruled from 2704 to 2595 BC, Sima Qian presents his historical account of China. Ferguson does not think it is safe to place the start of the historical period before the collapse of the Shang dynasty and the ascent of the House of Chow in 1122 BC, although some other authors reference the earlier era of the mythical three emperors. However, the House of Chow made sacrifices for Hu Qi, who was regarded by their people as a pioneer and farmer. Civilization was established during the Chow period, and the populace was skilled in farming and writing. According to archaeological evidence, China's civilization during the Chow dynasty was a continuous development from the earlier civilization of the country's original inhabitants, rather than an import from other nearby cultures. Ferguson states, China developed a civilization distinct from any other nation of antiquity, and this civilization, with many changes and wide development, has remained down to the present day. China has lived the longest continuous existence of all the civilizations that the world has ever known. These bold statements may be contested by Egyptologists, Sumerologists, and Indian academics, and we may feel obliged to stand by our Persian allies. Acknowledging the risky endeavor of exploring beyond the Chow dynasty is crucial. as it is rife with dangers and obscured by misunderstanding. Chinese people treat the past as the present, which is endearing but unsettling. Ferguson strongly emphasizes continuity, which is clear when discussing the ancient pantheon. Larousse remarks, "The Chinese pantheon imitating earthly organization is among its most fascinating features. With its own minister and staff, it seems to be a huge government administration, or several government departments. The various gods are positive bureaucrats with well-defined powers and a rigid rank system. The most bureaucratic administration on the planet could be envious of their registers, reports, and directives regarding formalities and excessive paperwork. They submit a thorough report to their immediate superiors each month, and they submit an annual report to the august personage of Jade, the sovereign god, who then bestows his blessings or rebukes them. After that, they elevate or denigrate the gods and occasionally reject them. The gods are dynamic, one of the most inventive features of Chinese mythology. The functionary changes, but only the function remains. The old gods are replaced by new ones. These shifts take place in both space and time. We must understand that different places frequently give different characters the same powers. The author of the Larousse article on Chinese mythology, Professor Ui Tai, explains that he thinks the majority of Chinese gods are men who have become deified after they die rather than being divine beings. We must presume that Professor Tai did not have the chance to study the Sumerian pantheon at Karsag, or even the Persian and Egyptian ones, as this is not necessarily the case. However, he has clarified the confusion we mentioned in a few carefully chosen paragraphs. The entity that founded Karsag in the 9th millennium BC is Enlil, Lord of Cultivation in the Middle East. In addition, the god who established the city-state of Nippur thousands of years later was revered in Babylon at the time of her fall in the 6th century BC. Many misunderstandings have resulted from this. The gods of Egypt and India were successive successors. In the former land, Akun was succeeded by Re, Geb, Osiris, Horus, and Akun. The successor god retired and returned to the heavenly areas in each instance. We may be able to find some concrete substance beneath the Chinese pantheon's bureaucratic exterior. The august personage of Jade, Yu-Ti, also called the august supreme emperor of Jade, Yu Huangshang-Ti, but perhaps more commonly called Father Heaven, Lao Tianye, is at the top of the hierarchy, like Anu and Ahura Mazda. Like Khnum in Upper Egypt, the northern Chinese considered him one of the first gods and said that he created human beings by modeling them in clay. Yuti is only the second member of the Supreme Triad, even though he is regarded as the greatest of the gods. The august personage of Jade was preceded by the heavenly master of the first origin, and he will eventually be succeeded by the heavenly master of the dawn, Jade of the Golden Door. In the Kunlun Mountains, the immortals were ruled by Queen Mother, Butmg, Wang Mining Niang, the wife of the august personage of Jade. The peach is the symbol of longevity in China because the peaches of immortality, Pantao, which ripen once every 3,000 years on the trees of the imperial orchard, mainly provide the banquets of immortality she presides over for the gods. Only one of the Supreme Triad's gods was ever in contact with Earth, and the three emperors, the San Huang, were under its authority. Despite not being a tribe in the conventional sense of co-rulers, they seem to have gradually mirrored the development of Chinese society. Early nomadic tribes were ruled by the first, Fuxi, during a hunting era. The second, Shen Nung, symbolizes an agricultural period characterized by the founding of permanent communities and the importance of husbandry as the main source of income. Huang Ti, also known as the Yellow Emperor, was the third person to be given a unique personality. Additionally, people thought Huang Ti's birth was miraculous, and his reign was filled with paranormal activity. He assembled 6 influential ministers around him, see the Council of 7 at Karsag, and with their assistance, he created a calendar and organized the 60-year cyclical period. calculations in mathematics were introduced. In addition to many other amazing things, he taught the people how to use money, build boats and carriages, make musical instruments out of bamboo, which he brought to China, and make utensils from wood, metal, and earth, pottery. In the first temple built for his use, he was rumored to have offered sacrifices to Shang-Ti, the August Emperor of Japan. However, it is impossible to ascertain the actual nature of any construction he carried out. He is also credited with creating the first palace, distinguishing his home from the common people's. Huang Ti investigated the properties of different herbs and the workings of opposing principles in nature, transforming them into medicines that significantly extended human life. The unicorn, Qi Lin, and the phoenix, Feng Huan, emerged as proof of the benignity of his rule before his death or departure at the age of 111. We can identify the development pattern of Chinese civilization from other places. In essence, it is the creation of a king who sits at the head of a line of human dynastic rulers. Behind him is a hazy time when people have worked hard, just like him, to bring humanity to a level of organization and knowledge that, like a springboard, enables men to take advantage of the new teacher's more advanced skills. The Osiris of China was Huang Ti. It is far from certain, but some people believe he ruled in the early 3rd millennium BC. In addition to being the first of the historical 5 sovereigns who contributed substantially to the founding of China, he was also the final of the legendary 3 emperors, a legendary character who became the first dynastic ruler. 2 figures in the 3 emperors illustration have odd dual protuberances on their heads that we cannot explain, but they might be of alien origin. Among earthly men, many of the astral characters portrayed in the Askew and Bruce codes would have appeared conspicuously strange. It is also important to observe that the 2 emperors' costumes resemble those Enoch details in Chapter 4. 2 very tall men were in my room when I woke up. Their clothing was amazing. It was feathery and purplish in color. In the upcoming chapter on Japan, we will encounter a similar description again. According to Han Liqi's Chronology of the Han Dynasty, China's early history spans over 2 million years and is broken down into 10 major eras. Chinese writers depict Huang Ti, the Yellow Emperor, as the start of the 10th and final of these initiatory epochs, but they consider the entire span of epochs to be mythological and do not give them any credibility. However, myths aren't always amazing in our experience. Huang Ti was given a family name because his father served as the governor of Huxiong, the present-day city of Luoyang. Consequently, Huang Ti is represented by 2 figures, a historical figure from the dawn of civilization and a mythical figure from the distant past. According to legend, the mythological counterpart had dreamed of traveling to far-off places and regions where spirits lived, walking on air and sleeping in space like a bed. They don't burn in fire or sink in water, and they don't experience grief or fear. He taught people how to control their hearts and the forces of nature after waking up from such a dream for 3 months. He gained the ability to teach after another long sleep, and for 27 years, he successfully ruled the nation, making it as happy as a fairyland where common people drank dew instead of food and breathed in the air. They restrained their innate desires, guaranteeing that society operated according to the principles of flawless virtue. This suggests that Huang Ti was a spiritual teacher and a technology instructor, representing a spiritual master. Huang Ti is commonly referred to as a saint or Satguru in Indian philosophy. The earliest known master is probably Huang Ti, who lived during the golden age of the Mahabharata. After Taoism rose to prominence among Chinese philosophies, primarily thanks to the ethical philosopher Lao Tzu's teachings, its strong nationalistic undertones caused its adherents to assert that Huang Ti was the true founder of what was then regarded as a new religion, surpassing Lao Tzu in both prestige and time. Although the Yellow Emperor is frequently cited as the source of China's early mythology, we must also recognize Fuxi and Shen Nung, his imperial forebears. Tai Hao which translates to the Great Almighty, was Fu-Hassi's official title as emperor. According to representations, he was miraculously born and is both partially human and supernatural. His earliest known representation can be found on the stone tablets of Wuliang-Zhu in Shantung province, which date to 160 AD. The tablets show a woman walking beside him, the lower portions of her body shaped like entwined serpent tails, a symbolism we now know to be the Shining One's insignia. The female figure was identified as Nu Kua, who was noted as Fu-Hassi's sister and heir. Ferguson claims that the bas-relief's depiction of her body entwined with Fu-Hassi's implies that the two were either husband and wife or brother and sister. A third explanation is more plausible, implying that Fu-Hassi was helped by his sister Nu Kua during his rule. We think Ferguson's third theory is more likely to be accurate. The two individuals were most likely co-workers in the order of Anunnaki scientists, also known as the Guild of Serpents. Tradition dictated that Fu-Hassi prohibited marriages between individuals with the same last name and instituted matrimony. He is said to have discovered iron and driven wild animals out of the country, using it to make tools for fishing and hunting.